climate change, fresh water. These are huge issues that the world is dealing with. Pamela Gale-Malhotra is an animal sanctuary owner who was awarded India's highest award for women, the Nari Shakti Purashkar, for her work at the Sai Sanctuary, which is set on 250 acres and is India's first private wildlife sanctuary. She's just sent me photos. I've seen them. It is just looking so breathtakingly beautiful. The wildlife on their sanctuary includes Bengal tigers, Asian elephants, Dole, which is the Indian wild dog, the wild boar, leopards, samba, and of course the giant Malabar squirrel. This is an amazing story and it's covered in her new book, From the Heart of Nature. So, a very, very warm welcome, Pamela. We're so excited to learn more about the sanctuary and your work.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a real honor and a pleasure.
So tell us, how did this journey start with creating the Sai Sanctuary? From what I believe is that you and your husband have put your whole life savings into this.
I don't know about our whole life savings, although most of that has gone into the sanctuary too, but certainly our entire lives has gone into the sanctuary, that's for sure.
It's definitely a passion and it's a love
Yes.
project.
Yes, it is, without question, a love project and a passion of the heart, mind, and soul. As a child, I was very fortunate that my family lived next to a wealthy landowner whose estate was all wooded, and he loved children. So he did not mind at all that we children would go into his forest and see and play and see the wildlife there. I was always in those woods. And it was my dream as a young child to actually have some kind of forest wildlife sanctuary of my own when I grew up. When I met Anil, my husband, I shared that passion and love of wildlife and nature with him. And he had similar love of wildlife and nature as a child, although his circumstances had changed in between. But after he met me, we would go into the forest a lot, especially because I was in college in Colorado with the beautiful Colorado Rocky Mountains. So it was easy to go into nature and enjoy the beauty and splendor there of the Rockies and the wildlife that was there. So in Colorado itself, we sought to do at least some kind of protection and help for wildlife there. We did buy our first lands there, which were wooded deep in the forest, and we supplied a little help to the wildlife there during the cold winter months, which can be very, very, very cold. Our land was over 9,000 feet above sea level, so it was very cold and a lot of snow. So we would bring up bird seeds and things like this for the birds to help them get through the winter time, and a salt lick for the deer of the area, because that's an essential nutrient for them. And just little things for the animals in the area. And they would stay and eat that, what we had given them, which would be gone within a day or two. But the benefit of actually doing this came back later as what I would call a karmic boon, a real karmic boon. There was a terrible outbreak of pine beetle disease, and pine beetles can kill a tree in 3 months.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's very deadly. It's now with climate change, and the pine beetles used to be killed off in cold winters in like the Rockies and in Canada. But with the change in climates and the warmer weather in the winter, they're surviving and they can devastate whole forests. In our situation in Colorado, there was a pine beetle outbreak, and all of our neighbors lost trees and had to cut the trees down and then soak them in this terrible, horrible chemical in order to kill off the next generation of pine beetle. So our neighbors noticed that we didn't lose a single tree.
Okay.
And they asked me and my husband, what chemical are you spraying on your trees to keep them from being killed by the pine beetle? and we held up bird feeders. And they said, what do bird feeders have to do with pine beetles? And then we explained to them that just by offering a little help to the bird life in the area, especially woodpeckers, they would go feed on our little food and then do what they're supposed to do in nature, which is to kill those pests.
Oh my
Because those
goodness.
pests are meant for just food for the birds to keep the cycle of life going. So pretty soon, all our neighbors had bird feeders up everywhere, and it worked. In our area up there, there were not the
Such
pine.
a simple solution, and imagine.
Yes, and this was a lesson that was actually instilled in me as a child by my mother, who is part Native American Indian, and she learned from her mother how to help nature and the birds over the winter time. They were meat eaters. I'm vegetarian, but grew up meat eating, and they would save suet or oil, and then put bird seed in it and roll it into balls, and then put it on the limbs of the trees. And this fat is very important for the birds during the winter time because they burn up a lot of energy, and there aren't as many insects to keep their energy level up. So this little bit of a gift of this fat helps them stay healthy during the coldest time of the winter. So we used to put those things up in the winter too. So during the summer months, when the pine beetle were very active, the woodpeckers and other birds did what they were supposed to do, which is to keep those pests in check.
Awesome. Awesome. That's amazing.
And it was just another example of my mother's teachings that whenever, and it's a Native American concept, that whenever you go into nature, you always give a bit of an offering back to nature for everything that she provides to us. So, and it's very similar. You see the same type of a teaching in the ancient Vedas as well here in India, that when you are going into nature, you remember the other children of nature because they're our brothers and sisters. And every area that we take over means less area for the rest of the brothers and sisters of Mother Nature. So a little help here and a little help there goes a long way to help keeping nature in balance.
Not only that, that little help helps us also, right?
Yes, it does. That's what this whole pine beetle thing was so clear, so evident, and such a stark difference between those who did not help out just that little bit and those who did. So
But your journey did not stop there. So then from there you went to Hawaii?
yes. We actually went to Hawaii on our honeymoon and fell in love with the Hawaiian Islands. And we were shown some land up against the forest preserve on the big island of Hawaii, on the wet side of the island. And the land had two beautiful streams, year-round streams flowing through it that fed the two main waterfalls on the island, Akaka and Kahuna Falls. And so
Kahuna Falls is very famous because we've all heard of it.
yes. Kahuna, yes. It's very interesting because it's like it drops and then it drops again.
Yes.
And Akaka is really spectacular because it just drops all the way down. So the headwaters for these waterfalls flowed through this property. And even in the dry seasons, these streams, these rivers, actually kept flowing where most of the others would dry up. So we ended up buying this land, which was about 37.5 acres up against the forest reserve. And we started protecting the wildlife and all of it there. And we also did some organic farming up there. So this was like our first wildlife sanctuary, if you will. In the process of doing the organic farming, we also remembered the concept of giving back to nature. For example, around our vegetable farms, we would plant sunflower seeds, the sunflower seeds. Then they would come up rich with their sunflowers. And that is what the birds would eat, as well as helping to keep our crops free of pests.
Very
Rather than
nice.
eating the vegetables and things themselves, they were very happy with the sunflowers. So it's again another example of, if you will give a little bit to nature, she will give you so much more back in such an abundance. And we just have to change the mindset from conquering nature to cooperating with nature, and from being apart from nature to being a part of nature.
So beautifully said. So, how did you come to India? I think everybody's asking now. You're living in Colorado, you're living in Hawaii, and now all the way to India.
Well, actually, in October of 1985, we received a telegram from Anil's mother. She was the guru of an ashram in Pune, had joined spiritual life in the late 1940s at Sri Aurobindo's ashram. And her husband, who was Anil's father, of course, had retired. He had been an Indian origin, but an American citizen. So when he retired, he went to the ashram and stayed there in the ashram, involved in spiritual life himself. He got very ill. And so the telegram came from Anil's mother saying, "Come quickly, Dad's seriously ill." So we did go in January of 1986 and met Dad there. And he did end up passing away about 6 months later. And then we took the asthi, his ashes, and asthi, up to Haridwar for immersion in the Ganga. And we fell in love with the Himalayas. They reminded us both so much of the Colorado Rockies that we had loved so much. And we ended up.
Please say that again, because people don't believe that India is so majestically beautiful, because you're comparing this to the Colorado Rockies.
Oh, it is majestically beautiful. It really, really is. And the Himalayas, we just fell in love with. And there's also the spirituality that goes with the Himalayas. It is there's a very special vibration up there from all of the ages and ages and ages of the different spiritual sadhana that the various monks and nuns have done up there, of different faiths. And so it has a very high spiritual vibration that you can literally feel the difference. We could feel it. But the beauty is also of the areas that were left that have not been deforested. The evergreen forests and of the Himalayas are gorgeous. Some of those trees are just spectacular. The bronze and the rhododendrons it's just very, very, very beautiful. So we fell in love with the Himalayas, and we went all the way up to the Uttarkashi region. I do have to say that we were very distressed when we started on our trip up from Haridwar, Rishikesh, and Lakshman Jhula. We were very distressed at the amount of deforestation there was there. It was quite shocking. And we were very much afraid we weren't going to find anything that had trees left, much less actual forests.
And this is a real scare even today.
Oh, I know it is. I know it is. It's even scarier in many respects because there's been so much more development since when we were there. But we did find forests finally when we got to the Uttarkashi region. And above Uttarkashi town itself, we looked in two different areas. One was called Fold, which had forests around it, and the other was around the Asiganga area. And the Asiganga is a major tributary to the Bhagirathi River, which is, of course, what becomes the Ganga. And so we ended up going there and finding land and building our home there, and hoped that we could replicate our sanctuary in Hawaii there in the Himalayas. We did also buy some land even further in toward Dotital Lake, which is a beautiful area up there. And the land we still have is bordered by reserve forest. And you have black bear and other different species that come through. It's very, very, very beautiful. But we had one problem. And at that time, this was part of Uttar Pradesh. And the Uttar Pradesh land ceiling laws were such that a family could only own 12 acres of land, one whole family, just 12 acres of land. That wasn't anywhere near enough to do what we had wanted to do. So my husband, God bless him, set off for the South. We had actually been in the South quite soon after landing in India, and we had actually gone to Nagarhole National Park. And it was while we were in Nagarhole that the then wildlife warden, who was also a Kodava, K.M. Chinappa, asked us to please think of putting our sanctuary up in the Kodagu district, because this was his district, and he wanted to see as much of it preserved as possible. God had different plans, and we ended up in the Himalayas first, but we went full circle, and Anil ended up coming down here and searched all over. And it was quite a search. He went to Tamil Nadu, he went to Kerala, he went to different parts of Andhra Pradesh, Goa, Karnataka, and was very disappointed until someone reminded him about going to the Kodagu district. And that's when he came in touch with a friend of a planter whose land was being foreclosed. And that was the start of Sai Sanctuary, because that ended up being the first piece that is actually the heart of the sanctuary today.
That's amazing. But, that puts a lot of pressure when you start to think about it, that you need a lot of people that are in the private sector to start and say, I need to open my heart out and actually take these large parcels of land and protect them. Because, even though we feel that is the job of the government.
I understand. That is a common, I would call it, misconception, to think that this is all the government's job. It's even written in the Constitution of India that the citizens of India have a duty to protect and preserve the forests and wildlife and natural ecosystems, and to have compassion for living creatures. It is right there. First clause regards the state's responsibility, but the clause right after it deals with Indian citizens themselves and their duty to Mother Nature and to preserving the country's rich heritage of life that is found in nature for future generations. And I do understand that it's a little inhibiting to think of the money and values involved and the amount of work. Without my husband's expertise in law and finance, and his sheer determination.
I think passion. This
Yes.
takes a lot of passion.
Yes. Without that, the sanctuary would not exist. That is true. But today, we have to look to join hands with others. It may not be individuals, just like my husband and myself. It can be extended families. It can be a group of friends. It can be cooperation with NGOs. It can be cooperations with businesses. This is where business really needs to step up. They have CSR funding. That funding can go to help protect these private lands, especially those that are still forested, because they will help protecting us. As you mentioned before, we protect Mother Nature, she protects us. This is a perfect example of that. We protect her forests protect us from climate change, absorbing all of that carbon and giving us all the water we need. not just for bathing and drinking, etc., but also for manufacturing and running health institutions, college institutions. Any business has to have a reliable source of water. And if we don't have our forests, we don't have that source of water. So this is where business can have a very good, positive impact in helping to protect these or piece back together the fragmented areas of the government's forests, either with helping NGOs to make this purchase or being involved with CSR funds for individuals and groups. So there is a wide scope of cooperation where we can all pitch in and do our bit to help preserve the future, help, first of all, to help our present, but then to preserve the future for our children. Because if we don't, how do we look them in the eye years from now when temperatures are soaring and things are dying, including plenty of people? How do we look them in the eye and say, well, we didn't do it because we thought it was too hard, or we didn't care enough, or we thought it was too much to do? Those aren't good enough answers.
I just want to also bring attention to two things. It wasn't like you were born very wealthy. So I want people to understand that it is you have actually put and started from, from not a grand stature, because people might assume, okay, here she was living in Montana and Hawaii. She came with huge
No.
checks, and it was not an issue for buying up and saving.
No. I came from a middle-class family in America. Both my mother was a teacher. My father was a construction engineer. All of us kids had to work for our money to be able to go to college, to afford our college fees and all of the living expenses involved in college, which my parents, of course, helped out. But still, we all had to work. I've been working since I was 14 years old.
I wanted to just clarify that so people
Yes.
do understand that this is something that really is love also and passion.
Yes, and in Anil's situation also, in fact, the entire sanctuary has been bought with Anil's self-earned money. It has not been gifted to us. It has not been given by donation. It has not been inherited. It has been Anil's own hard-won, self-earned money that has gone into every piece that makes up the sanctuary. And the most important thing in life is to have a goal, because if you don't have that goal, then you're just kind of wandering from here, there, and you're existing. You're not moving forward. You're just kind of treading water, as it were. Our goal was a dual goal. One was to turn my dream of this wildlife sanctuary into a reality. The second was to help ourselves from a spiritual standpoint by being in this incredible forest and connect with the spirit that's behind all of this beautiful forest reality. So we had to save, we had to scrimp. I mean, I worked 2 jobs. I didn't have weekends off. Anil worked like crazy. He was on commissions. And anyone that works on commission knows how difficult that can be. You can do so much work and then it doesn't pan out. So it was a lot of hard work and dedication. And yes, our life savings and then some is here in the sanctuary. But it has always been our passion, our goal, and my dream. And we hope to inspire others to follow that same path, because I have not found anything more fulfilling than doing this kind of work. I have not found anything more joyful than being out in nature and experiencing the wildlife and the beauty and just the awe of nature all around. And then the peace, and being able to hear like the wind blowing or the water flowing. We have forgotten how to use our senses because we're in the cities and we're constantly assaulted by noises and smells and terrible sights, etc. Going back in nature helps reconnect us with our mother. She is our mother. And it helps remind us of what our senses were supposed to be used for.
And I also want you to delve into this because deforestation, I think a lot of us have understood climate change, but this pressure that fresh water, especially drinking water, is also at risk. Please talk a little bit about that because I think a lot of people have started talking about it, but I think let's bring that also to the forefront. Because it's the basis of our survival, you know?
It is. Without water, we cannot survive. Anil would always have a wonderful saying. He would say, without trees, there is no forest. Without forest, there is no rainfall. Without rainfall, there is no water. Without water, there is no life. Now, what he has said in that equation has been proven time and time and time again by science, especially in equatorial rain belts, and most of India falls within that equatorial rain belt area. Over 50% of the rain is generated by the forests themselves. And the way that they have discovered this is what trees do. It's a dual process. The first is evapotranspiration. This is where the leaves of the tree suck up water from under the ground and bring it up the trunk and out the branches into the leaves, where it's released as water vapor during the process of photosynthesis, where they take the sun and the carbon and all of this in order to make the sugars for the tree to live upon. When they put that water vapor out there, the other part of what trees and flora in general, especially mushrooms in forests, do is they spew forth tiny spores of potassium salts. When those go into the air, the water vapor coagulates around that spore to form raindrops. Exactly. And so you have your cloud formation with the raindrops and then the rainfall.
You've explained science so beautifully.
But what's even more amazing is you can actually tell where the rain has formed from. Now, of course, there's evaporation from the oceans, or like the Bay of Bengal or like the Arabian Sea, that goes up, and that has a potassium salt too, which forms for water vapors, etc. But each potassium salt has its own specific chemical signature. They're different. The ones that are spewed forth and cause the rain from the trees are different than the ones that have come from evaporation from the ocean. So you can catch the water and put it under a microscope and say, oh, this was generated by the forest, and this was generated by the ocean. And that is how they've come to realize how critically important the equatorial rainforest belt is, with over 50% of that rainfall coming from the forests themselves. And here in India, our forests, especially along the Western Ghats area, which are being decimated terribly, are critically important because they start the process of bringing in the heavy monsoons from the Arabian Sea. When the trees put forth their new leaves after the dry season, around this time in March, April, and those leaves start to do a lot of evapotranspiration, and they create these small disturbances in order to have pre-monsoon showers. This sets up an air convection where the cooler air from the rain showers mixes with the warmer air from the ground, and it acts literally like a pulley in creating enough disturbance to help draw in those heavily weighted monsoon clouds from the west, from the Arabian Sea. And that is how our monsoon gets started. So when we deforest our Western Ghats, we not only diminish our rainfall amount, but we also delay the start of the monsoons.
Oh, very beautifully explained. Now, shifting gears a bit, how was putting all this into a book?
Ah, a daunting experience, and one that lasted several years. I had always wanted to write an autobiography. And it was actually a woman who worked for us in Hawaii way back then that said, you and your husband have had such an interesting life. You need to write a book about it. I never really thought I would. But when Penguin contacted me and asked me to write it, I said, okay. It was daunting because there was a lot of research involved in it too. But it was such a joyful experience too, because I went through my husband's life, went through my own life, reliving our lives together, how we met, because we were on opposite ends of the political spectrum when we met. It was like petrol meeting fire, and when we first met.
They were flames.
Flames. And I'm not talking passion flames here. I'm talking about political fire, which was really, really amazing. And that's a whole nother story where meeting my husband was the first revelation, my first intellectual revelation, because I had been very confused and did not understand what was really going on in the world politically, geopolitically, et cetera. So it was going through all of that together. And of course, my husband was with me during the writing of the entire book. And I would bounce ideas off of him, and he would listen to everything that I had written and give me his feedback. And so it was like going through the journey all over again, together again. And so it was a wonderful, wonderful walk down memory lane, decades and decades of memory lane. So it was daunting, but it was also an extraordinarily uplifting and wonderful experience at the same time.
Now, of course, we all want to know, what can we do? What can we adapt easily, because we are all a little bit lazy, but we want to do something. What can we adapt into our day-to-day life that can help?
Okay, one of the first things that I would say, and we hear it all the time, but we may not think about it, is preserve every drop of water. Preserve every drop of water. Here in India, people are used to taking bucket baths and or turning water on and turning water off. That is very, very important, because in the West, they're getting into that now, but in the past, it was just leave the water on. So preserving every part of every drop of water is important. Also, we have to take a good hard look at our own lifestyle. Are we remembering to turn off the light switches when we're not in a room? Are we turning off any appliances or TV or anything like that we are not using? Each switch that's on is a drain of energy. And that drain of energy means more fossil fuels, in most cases, are being pumped into the atmosphere. So if we as individuals take stock of how much energy we're wasting and how much that's contributing to polluted skies and climate change, and we take responsibility for that, then we can help remember to turn things off. Eating locally and changing our diets. If people can become vegan or vegetarian, that is a major help to the forests, because so much of the forest is cut down to provide feed, soybean feed, etc., or pasture lands for cattle or sheep or other animals that are killed for slaughter. So even if we can't, and remember, I came from meat eating family. 3 times a day we had meat, 3 times a day. So if you can't cut out, I know it's a transition, at least cut down. That, and even dairy products overconsumed will put more pressure on Mother Nature. So your diet is very important. Also recycling everything you can. Wherever you live in your neighborhood, start getting involved. Do you have a park nearby? See if it can be beautified. See if there's a community group that you can work with together, because the more plants that are planted, especially those that produce some type of flowers and seeds for birds or small little mammals, the more you're helping the cycle of life, and you're helping the carbon cycle at the same time. And it's far more peaceful. You'll have a place you can walk in where you can breathe in some oxygen.
Because, I mean, post-COVID, we're already struggling. It was beautiful blue skies and
yes, isn't it? That's true. Yes. So we need to take responsibility, and for our own lifestyle. Do we really need that brand new smartphone? Do we have to go for that new laptop? We have to examine our choices as far as what we purchase. How really important are they? And how much can we use that is still working fine, but is just a few years old? Then, as I said, recycling everything we can, being creative. I mean, using bottles, reusing bags, trying to go from the plastic things to the reusable things, using cloth bags, et cetera, that type of thing. It sounds very small, but in a country as large as India, when we as individuals make a decision to do something, it has a major ripple effect across the entire country and the world at large. It truly, truly does. We have such a large population. If it goes in the right direction, we are helping to push the new wave of rewilding, protecting, and Mother Earth, and helping preserve the planet for our children and our children's children in a way we can be happy and proud to hand over to them.
But I love what you've said, Pamela, because what you've told us is something that all of us can do. There is nothing in there that says, oh my goodness, I need to make such a big, drastic change to my lifestyle. It's just being more mindful and being mindful of our choices. Thank you so much. Like I told you, I'm dying to come. I cannot wait. It is like on my to-do. I am wanting to see the Bengal tigers and the Asian elephants. So thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been my pleasure.